So currently there's a lot of fluctuation happening within the video games industry, and in this video I'm going to try to make sense of it. I'm going to try to shed light on all the different factors that led to where we currently are and share some predictions on where I think this might be going. Because I think at this point, looking at what's currently going on, it is reasonable to ask questions like, are we heading into a new video game recession? If you want to look this up, it was like a large-scale recession that affected the video games industry from 1983 to 85. And to be honest, I never thought that that might even be a possibility, that in my lifetime we would experience a new video games recession, because the medium is so big at this point, it's so successful, it makes so much money. How could it possibly head into a recession? But if you look at the world of video games, at the developers, at the publishers, at the scene as a whole, it's clearly in a crisis already. I wouldn't compare it to the 1983 to 85 recession, but there's such a massive transition happening at the moment, and there's so much uncertainty, and I just felt like I want to do a video in which I try to make sense of this, right? So one thing that we can really witness recently more and more is that smaller studios are producing more and more largely successful games. I mean, Helldivers 2 is probably the most prominent example at the moment. Everyone's raving about that. That was like a rather small Swedish studio. Palworld, Baldur's Gate 3, which basically destroyed games like Starfield, right? Skull and Bones just came out. And these games launched to like lukewarm reception. They often disappoint. I'm not saying they are horrible games, right? I'm not saying this, but when you compare the effort and money and time that goes into those games like Starfield and Skull and Bones, and then compare it to games like Helldivers 2 or Palworld specifically, it's just a wild comparison. So I think a lot of the big players within the video games industry are currently realizing that they don't need as many people anymore to make their games, right? They're looking at these studios that have significantly less people working for them, and they churn out very, very successful and often innovative games. So it seems like smaller teams seem to capture what large teams fail to do. And taking that thought one step further, it almost seems like there's a point to be made about bigger teams making production of video games almost counterproductive, right? It's almost like a burden on the process if you have too many people working on it. That's at least my feeling. That's how it feels at the moment. And then there are other aspects, like AI is on the rise, right? That's a whole separate chapter. I mean, in the very near future, I think it's fair to assume that whole environments will be generated by AI and then just cleaned up by environmental artists, rather than a dedicated environment artist building the whole thing from scratch. So AI tools will also impact that massively and lead to less people overall being needed to make games and speed the process up. And we've seen it already in 2023. There were mass layoffs at various companies, and just in this year, right, in early 2024, Microsoft let go 1,900 workers of their Xbox and Activision Blizzard division. Unity Software laid off 1,800 people. Riot Games laid off 530 people. Eidos Montreal laid off 97, which is 20% of their workforce as well. And then very recently, like just in the 2 weeks, Supermassive Games announced they let people go. Sony Playstation announced that they're going to close their whole London studio, letting go around 900 people. EA just announced, I think yesterday or the day before, that they're cutting their workforce of around 670 people. That's 5% of their overall workforce. So there's a clear trend of all these big players scaling down, reducing the workforce, and all while shareholders and high-ranking management still rake in millions in bonuses every year. So I don't think we can make the point and say, well, games are not profitable enough, we have to let go all these people. It really doesn't seem to be the case. And it's funny to me that this is something that is not talked about that much, right? Everyone talks about, oh my God, that many people have been let go. Oh God, EA fired 5% of their workforce and all that. But nobody's pointing at the high-ranking management who's still getting these insane bonuses every year, which I think leads to a bigger point, okay? But we'll get to that. Another factor that I've been observing for a long time now, to be honest, for years, is that there seems to be a huge drought of new ideas within the games industry. Gameplay innovation is plateauing. Graphics at this point are plateauing as well. Many games feel very same-ish. Mission structures all feel the same. Every game you play feels like a repetition of a game that you played before. And lots of players, I think, are just fatigued with that. Not everyone, right? Because there are lots of young players coming in and they're going through all these mechanics and gameplay structures for the first time, so they're excited. But I think a lot of people are just fatigued. And there's very, very little innovation happening within the whole industry of video games. I mean, sure, you can make the point and say if you want innovation, you got to go to the indies, right? The smaller studios, that's where innovation happens. But even The indie studios at this point feel like they're regurgitating ideas of other studios, not saying there's no innovation, but very, very rarely a game crosses my path where I'm like, oh wow, like that is such a fresh take on what gaming can be. And developers seem to not know a way out of this dilemma. Right? They try to sell us the new game. It's like, oh yeah, soon it's an Indiana Jones game. And I look at the gameplay trailer and I'm like, it's not even only gameplay. But I look at that trailer and I'm like, yeah, okay, you got a whip this time. That's like how far the innovation really goes. It doesn't really feel like, don't get me wrong, I haven't played the game. It might be insanely innovative. But from what I've seen so far, it feels like I've played that game before, and just because they put it first person doesn't exactly change the way I'm going to play or experience that game. So there is a serious struggle within this industry to innovate, to come up with new ideas, to take bold steps. And then as a continuation from that thought, with the amount of huge games pushing to the market, most games at this point have a rather short lifespan, at least in terms of active players, while costing an insane amount of money and man hours to make, right? So that balance seems to be way off as well. If you put a game out like Skull and Bones, for example, that has been in development, I think, for 11 years, I mean, I could already tell before this game came out that it's basically going to be dead on arrival. That game is not going to last for very long, at least not with like a solid player base. And very, very few games make it past that point where they actually are able to maintain a big player base. There are exceptions, right? Like maybe GTA 5, for example, and GTA Online has maintained like a fairly big player base. I mean, it's on decline as well throughout the time that it's been around. But with all the updates, with all the content that's been fed into this game, it kind of has maintained a fairly big player base. It is rather impressive. But for most titles, that calculation of time and money investment you put into games versus the time that the game is actually popular and returns money, it just doesn't add up anymore. The scale is off. And in the past years, it seemed like video game developers and publishers tried to counter that by pushing the prices up slightly, by introducing more live service elements, battle passes or whatever, paid cosmetics, right? Every game is $70 now if it's big enough. And people are sick of it. Okay, people don't want it. People don't want purchasable cosmetics or battle passes. I understand that we were coming from way worse mechanics, like, you know, loot boxes and horrible gambling mechanics that you have to pay for and maybe you get the item you want. Like, the battle pass is already a fair compromise, but people are still sick of it, and people don't want to pay $70 for a video game that you play for 10 or 12 or 15 hours and then you put in the corner. It for the consumer, we've been educated for a very long time that games cost a certain price and deliver a certain value and entertainment value to you, and now they're trying to stretch that value, and consumers are like, no, I'm not doing this. Then I'd rather not buy the game. But then on the other hand, speaking of games like Palworld, that's a $30 game. Okay, I'm not saying it's a quadruple A game, but this is a game that's popular, and it is popular in part because it has a price that seems reasonable for what you're getting. Helldivers 2 is a $40 game with no battle pass shenanigans. So that is another thing that I think these smaller studios have understood, and they're like, we make more money if we sell a good game for a cheaper price point and design it in a way that feels like we're taking the players seriously. Okay, like we're not trying to rip off the players at every corner. It's like, oh, you want that mask or that thing, well, that's going to cost you extra. You do that, you ruin the relationship with the players, who are ultimately the people who keep your game alive, who keep that income coming to your company. And that's another thing, right? So many developers, when it comes to communicating with the players, they are hiding behind like corporate consumer service walls. Problems that gamers are highlighting of the games are silenced, are not listened to, and rarely, when it comes to AAA games, there's like a healthy conversation going on between the developer and the fans. There is no transparency in the development process and how they go about it. And you can see this because studios like EA and so on, they don't call us like players or gamers, they call us consumers. Okay, to them, we're just consumers. There is an attitude of whatever we create, we'll throw it to them and they'll eat it up anyway. Okay, the consumers will eat it up. We don't care. It already, from the starting point, from the get-go, has like a tone of voice that doesn't take the people who actually make your games great, the players, doesn't take them serious. And again, players are sick of that. Okay, I don't think many people articulate that and go out and write on Twitter like, I want to communicate with the game developers. No, but it's a thing that subconsciously sizzles in the games industry, and you can just feel how people are getting fed up with this arrogant top-down style of games development. Meanwhile, the CEO of Arrowhead Games, right? The creators behind Helldivers 2. The CEO is called Johan Pilestedt, and this dude engages with fans on Twitter. He's on Twitter, listens to the feedback. That doesn't mean he takes everything on board that everyone says, right? But he engages in conversations, he's there, he shows a presence, and he kind of gives people a level-headed approach. He's like, look, I'm one of you guys, I'm a gamer, I listen to what you want to hear, and if you got a very good idea and something that really makes sense, and if enough people jump on that idea, we'll see what we can do, okay? We'll try to weave it in. He listens to the feedback, he addresses it, and he manages expectations. And that just feels like a level of respect that this studio, that this CEO in this particular case is giving the gamers, right? It's like, I know you guys make the game what it is. You add the value to the game. I respect you for that, and I want to have this conversation. Whether that's actually what he feels or whether it's just like a marketing strategy, to be honest, I don't care. But the point is, it's a fresh take on what's happening in the game industry with like big developers like Bethesda, like EA and so on, where none of this is happening. Okay, it just shows that these slightly smaller studios seem to have a better understanding of what makes their games great. And I think the AAA industry has a lot to learn from that. Okay, they really need to get off their high horse and look at what these studios are doing. And I feel the big waves of like layoffs at the moment and in the full last year already are to an extent a reflection of that, because they understand, well, we need actually less people to make those games. It's not just AI revolutionizing this industry, but we can only hope that they also understand all the other aspects I just mentioned of communicating with the fans, listening to the fans, not having battle passes, selling a product at a reasonable price that doesn't give the players the feeling that they've been ripped off left and right. They have to become more approachable and not hide behind these big corporate billion-dollar office walls, and understand that corporate greed is being punished in this industry. So as horrible as all these layoffs are at the moment, and as negative these trends are in the games industry with AI on the rise and all that, I think there's a positive spin to the whole thing, where it feels like a lot of AAA developers are now realizing they've gone down the wrong path for quite some time now. And if they want to stay relevant and they want to stay in the business, they need to make some significant changes. How that translates into the specific business and specific company, that remains to be seen. But I think because they depend on us buying their games and actually playing their games, hopefully it works a little bit like a self-regulating system, right? Where we don't buy the games, we get very verbal about like horrible pay-to-win mechanics and so on social media, and just like cook up a huge shitstorm, which will ultimately make them realize that change has to happen. But guys, this is just my take on this, okay? These are my thoughts. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts, okay? Because obviously it's a controversial topic. Everyone will have an opinion on it. Please leave your thoughts on this down in the comment section below. I'll read your comments and make sure I'll reply to them where necessary. Let's engage in a conversation about this, about the future of the video games industry and where it is right now. Where do you see it going? What are your thoughts on these mass layoffs? Share all your thoughts down in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this little breakdown and basically a brain dump of some of my thoughts I had, which were, by the way, inspired by conversations we had on our Discord. Okay, so if you want to join the Discord, the link is down in the description. I'm hanging out there. Lots of other people are hanging out there. And that's where we have debates like the ones that lead to videos like this one. Okay, so I would appreciate you joining the Discord, meeting you there, having your input into these conversations, and then ultimately your input will end up in one of these videos as well, possibly. I appreciate your time. Have a great day. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel for more, and I see you in the next one. I'm out. Bye.